Unit 10. Merriam-Webster's Vocabulary Builder. Put comes from the Latin verb putar, meaning to think, consider, or believe. So, for example, a reputation is what others think of you. But when the root shows up in such words as compute, dispute, and deputy, its meaning is harder to trace. Reputed. Believed to be a certain way by popular opinion. The 15th century Prince Vlad the Impaler is reputed to have inspired the character Dracula, though in fact, evil though Vlad was, Dracula's creator only borrowed his nickname. Reputed is used constantly today by reporters, and almost always to describe suspected criminals, the reputed mobster, the reputed drug kingpin, the reputed gang leader, etc. But the word shouldn't be left to journalists. Your elderly aunt may, for instance, be reputed to have made a large fortune in oil, or to have had 4 husbands who all died mysteriously. Reputed is easy to confuse with reputable, and they used to mean the same thing, that is, having a good reputation, but it's become rare to hear reputed used with that meaning today. Disrepute. Loss or lack of good reputation, disgrace. The family had fallen into disrepute after the conviction and imprisonment of his father and uncle. A reputation can be easy to lose, and someone who is no longer respectable may eventually find he's become genuinely disreputable, the kind of person that almost no one wants to be seen with. Disrepute isn't only for individuals. A company may fall into disrepute as a result of news stories about its products' defects, drug scandals have brought entire sports into disrepute, and a scientific theory may fall into disrepute as a result of new discoveries. Impute. To attribute. The British imputed motives of piracy to American ships trying to prevent them from interfering with American trade during the War of 1812. Imputing something to someone, or something, usually means observing something invisible in that person, or thing. We may impute meaning to a play or novel, or to a casual remark by a friend, that was never intended. Many of us like to impute bad motives to others, while always regarding our own motives as pure. In tax law, imputed income is something that isn't actual money but might as well be, for example, the free use of a car lent to you by your employer. Putative. Generally supposed, assumed to exist. To strengthen the case for the defense, a putative expert took the stand. Putative is almost always used to express doubt or skepticism about a common belief. Thus, Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, a picturesque ruin, is the putative fortress of the medieval King Arthur. The residents of New York City are putatively chic, neurotic, rude, and dangerous. And cable TV is full of putative experts, who often turn out not to have much knowledge of the subjects they're talking about. Log. From the Greek word logos, meaning word, speech, or reason, is found particularly in English words that end in logi and log. The ending, logi, often means the study of, so, for instance, biology is the study of life, and anthropology is the study of humans. And log usually indicates a type of discussion, thus, dialogue is conversation between 2 people or groups, and an epilogue is an author's last words on a subject. But exceptions aren't hard to find. Physiology. 1. A branch of biology dealing with the processes and activities by which living things, tissues, and cells function. 2. The life processes and activities of a living thing or any of its parts. For students planning to go to medical school, the university's most popular major is human physiology. The Latin root physio generally means physical, so human physiology deals with just about everything that keeps us alive and working, and other physiology specialties do the same for other animals and for plants. To do anything serious in the field of health, you've obviously got to know how the body's organs and cells function normally. Physiology used to be considered separately from anatomy, which focuses on the body's structures. However, it's now known that structure and function can't easily be separated in a scientific way, so, anatomy and physiology are often spoken of in the same breath. Methodology. A set of methods or rules followed in a science or field. Some researchers claimed that Dr. Keller's methodology was sloppy and had led to unreliable conclusions. The methodology employed in an experiment is essential to its success, and bad methodology has spoiled thousands of research projects. So whenever a piece of research is published in a scientific or medical journal, the researchers always carefully describe their methodology, otherwise, other scientists couldn't possibly judge the quality of what they've done. Ideology. The set of ideas and beliefs of a group or political party. By the time she turned 19, she realized she no longer believed in her family's political ideology. The root ideo, as you might guess, means idea. Ideas and theories about human behavior can always be carried too far, since such behavior is very hard to pin down. So ideological thinkers, people who come up with large theories about how the world works and try to explain everything, and maybe even predict the future, according to those theories, are almost always disappointed, sooner or later, to find that it doesn't really work out. A person intensely devoted to a set of political ideas or theories can be called an ideologue, a translation of the French idéologue, a word actually coined by Napoleon as a label for those political thinkers full of ideas he had no use for. Cardiology. The study of the heart and its action and diseases. After his heart attack, he actually bought himself a cardiology textbook and set about learning everything he could about his unreliable organ. The root card, closely related to cord, see cord, shows up in many heart-related words. Cardiologists frequently find themselves studying cardiograms, the charts of heart activity, made by machines called cardiographs. Heart attacks, and deaths caused by them, have both declined as a result of better medical emergency procedures, cholesterol-lowering drugs, and a decline in smoking. But the factors likely to actually improve heart health, such as better diets and more cardiovascular exercise, such as running, that improves the heart and blood vessels, haven't made any progress at all. So we should all be prepared to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, an emergency procedure done on someone whose heart has stopped, to get the heart and lungs working again. Ter. Comes from the Latin terra, earth. A territory is a large expanse of land. Terra firma is Latin for firm ground, as opposed to the swaying seas. A terrace is a leveled area, often one created for farming on a sloping hill. And the French word for potato, pomme de terre, means literally, apple of the earth. Parterre. 1. A decorative garden with paths between the beds of plants. 2. The back area of the ground floor of a theater, often under the balcony. The city's park boasts a beautiful parterre with many varieties of roses. Parterre comes to English by way of French, where it means, on the ground. And in the early years of the theater, the parterre was truly on the ground. In Shakespeare's day, an English theater's parterre was the cheap standing room area right in front of the stage, normally filled with rowdy spectators. The original idea of the French parterre garden, with its carefully designed plots and walkways, was to present an artistic pattern when seen from above, from a balcony, a raised terrace, or the top of an outdoor staircase. English gardeners responded with garden designs that tried to make their viewers half forget that they were seeing something created by humans rather than untamed nature itself. Subterranean. Underground. In Carlsbad Caverns National Park there is an astonishing subterranean chamber over half a mile long. A tunnel is a subterranean road or pathway, and a subway is a subterranean railway. The subterranean vaults at Fort Knox hold billions of dollars of gold reserves. Subterranean reservoirs called aquifers are tapped for water. In places where the pressure on the subterranean water is great enough, a hole drilled in the ground will bring it bubbling to the surface. Terrarium. An enclosure, usually transparent, with a layer of dirt in the bottom in which plants and sometimes small animals are kept indoors. When no one was watching, they dropped their snake in the 5th grade terrarium, and then waited in the hall to hear the screams. The turtle exhibit at a zoo is often in the form of a terrarium, as are some of the exhibits at a plant conservatory. In an ant terrarium, elementary school students watch the ants dig their network of tunnels as if no one were watching. Terrariums try to create conditions as close as possible to a natural habitat. A covered terrarium can often sustain itself for months on the moisture trapped inside. But creating a good terrarium requires careful control not only of humidity but also of temperature, as well as good ventilation. The lighting should include the full spectrum of sunlight as well as a day-night regulator. Terrestrial. 1. Having to do with Earth or its inhabitants. 2. Living or growing on land instead of in water or air. The roadrunner, although a largely terrestrial bird, can take flight for short periods when necessary. Everything on or having to do with Earth can be called terrestrial. Mercury, Venus, and Mars are often called the terrestrial planets, since they are rocky balls somewhat like Earth rather than great globes of gas like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Something extraterrestrial comes from beyond the Earth and its atmosphere. The word can be used to describe anything out of this world, from moon rocks to meteors. Turning to the second sense of terrestrial, animals are often divided into the terrestrial, land-living, and the aquatic, water-living. And sometimes terrestrial animals are contrasted with arboreal animals, those that live in trees. Mar. From the Latin word mare, meaning sea, brings its salty tang to several English words. A submarine is an undersea ship. Marine means basically relating to the sea, so when the Continental Marines were established back in 1775, their job was to provide onboard security on naval ships, but they immediately began to be used on land as well, and the Marines have continued to operate on both land and sea ever since. Marina. A dock or harbor where pleasure boats can be moored securely, often with facilities offering supplies or repairs. The coast of Florida has marinas all along it for the use of anything from flimsy sailboats to enormous yachts. Marina comes straight from Latin, where it means simply of the sea. At a modern marina, sailors can acquire whatever they need for their next excursion, or they can tie up their boats until the next weekend comes along. Some even imitate John D. McDonald's famous detective hero Travis McGee, who lives on his boat in Miami and rarely leaves the marina. Aquamarine. 1. A transparent blue or blue-green gem. 2. A pale blue or greenish blue that is the color of clear seawater in sunlight. Many of the houses on the Italian Riviera are painted aquamarine to match the Mediterranean. Aqua marina is Latin for seawater, so when a lovely blue-green form of the semi-precious gem known as beryl was given an English name several centuries ago, aquamarine seemed appropriate. Aquamarine is the ideal color that most of us carry around in our heads when we imagine the waters that lap the shores of the Greek and Caribbean islands on a sunny day. But even the Mediterranean and the Caribbean can take on lots of other colors depending on weather conditions. Mariner. A seaman or sailor. When he signed on as a mariner, the young Ishmael never suspected that the ship would be pursuing a great white whale. In Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, an old seaman tells of how, by shooting a friendly albatross, he had brought storms and disaster to his ship, and how as punishment his shipmates hung the great seabird around the mariner's neck and made him wear it until it rotted. The word mariner has occasionally been used to mean simply explorer, as in the famous Mariner spaceflights in the 1960s and 70s, the first to fly close to Mars, Venus, and Mercury. Maritime. 1. Bordering on or having to do with the sea. 2. Having to do with navigation or commerce on the sea. As a result of the ocean, Canada's maritime provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island, have a late spring but a mild winter. The maritime countries of Portugal and England produced many seafaring explorers during the 16th and 17th centuries, many of whom sailed under the flags of other countries. Sailing for the Spanish, Ferdinand Magellan captained the ship that was the first to circle the world, charting many new maritime routes as it went. Henry Hudson, funded by the Dutch, sailed up what we call today the Hudson River, claiming the maritime area that now includes New York City for the Netherlands. Path comes from the Greek word pathos, which means feeling or suffering. So a pathetic sight moves us to pity, and a sympathetic friend feels with you when you yourself are suffering. Pathos. 1. An element in life or drama that produces sympathetic pity. 2. An emotion of sympathetic pity. The pathos of the blind child beggar she had seen in India could still keep her awake at night. Pathos comes directly from Greek. According to Aristotle, the persuasive power of public speaking relies on three elements: the speaker's authority, the logic of the speech, and the speech's pathos. Aristotle claims that pathos is the appeal to the audience's sense of right and wrong, and that it is this, unlike authority and logic, that moves the audience's emotions. Today we usually speak of pathos as an element in fiction, film, drama, music, or even painting, or the real-life pathos of a situation or personality. Since pathos is closely related to pathetic, it's not surprising that, like pathetic, pathos may occasionally be used a bit sarcastically. Apathetic. 1. Showing or feeling little or no emotion. 2. Having no interest. His apathetic response to the victory bewildered his friends. Apathy, or lack of emotion, is central to Albert Camus' famous novel The Stranger, in which the main character's indifference toward almost everything, including his mother's death, results in his imprisonment. We feel little sympathy for him, and may even feel antipathy or dislike. The American voter is often called apathetic. Of all the industrial democracies, only in America does half the adult population fail to vote in major elections. As you can see, apathetic isn't the opposite of pathetic, even though the A that it begins with means not or without. Empathy. The feeling of, or the ability to feel, the emotions and sensations of another. Her maternal empathy was so strong that she often seemed to be living her son's life emotionally. In the 19th century, Charles Dickens counted on producing an empathetic response in his readers strong enough to make them buy the next newspaper installment of each novel. Today, when reading a novel such as A Tale of Two Cities, only the most hard-hearted reader could fail to feel empathy for Sidney Carton as he approaches the guillotine. One who empathizes suffers along with the one who feels the sensations directly. Empathy is similar to sympathy, but empathy usually suggests stronger, more instinctive feeling. So a person who feels sympathy, or pity, for victims of a war in Asia may feel empathy for a close friend going through the much smaller disaster of a divorce. Telepathic. Involving apparent communication from one mind to another without speech or signs. After 10 years of marriage, their communication is virtually telepathic, and each always seems to know what the other is thinking. Since tele means distant, see tele, you can see how telepathy means basically feeling communicated from a distance. The word was coined around 1880, when odd psychic phenomena were being widely discussed by people hoping that researchers might find a scientific basis for what they believed they themselves were experiencing. Today, when people talk about extrasensory perception, or ESP, telepathy is usually what they're talking about. In recent years, the notion of memes, ideas that might somehow physically fly from brain to brain so that people all over the world might have the same idea at about the same time without any obvious communication, has been widely discussed. Even though scientists haven't been able to establish the existence of telepathy, about 30% of Americans continue to believe in it. Pen/pun. Comes from the Latin words pena, penalty, and punire, to punish. A penalty is, of course, a punishment. Penal. Having to do with punishment or penalties, or institutions where punishment is given. The classic novels Les Miserables and The Count of Monte Cristo portray the terrible conditions in French penal institutions in the 19th century. A state or country's penal code defines its crimes and describes its punishments. During the 18th and 19th centuries, many countries established penal colonies, where criminals were sent as punishment. Often these were unbearably severe, but it was to such colonies that some of Australia's and the United States' early white inhabitants came, and the convicts provided labor for the European settlement of these lands. Impunity. Freedom from punishment, harm, or loss. Under the flag of truce, the soldiers crossed the field with impunity. Impunity is protection from punishment, just as immunity is protection from disease. Tom Sawyer, in Mark Twain's novel, broke his Aunt Polly's rules with near impunity because he could usually sweet-talk her into forgiving him. If that failed, he had enjoyed himself so much he didn't care what punishment she gave him. Penance. An act of self-punishment or religious devotion to show sorrow or regret for sin or wrongdoing. In the Middle Ages, bands of pilgrims would trudge to distant holy sites as penance for their sins. Penance as a form of apology for a mistake can be either voluntary or ordered by someone else. Many religions include penance among the ways in which believers can show repentance or regret for a misdeed. The Christian season of Lent, 40 days long, is traditionally a time for doing penance. Punitive. Giving, involving, or aiming at punishment. The least popular teachers are usually the ones with punitive attitudes, those who seem to enjoy punishing more than teaching. Punitive is an important word in the law. When you sue a person or company for having wronged you in some way, you normally ask for something of value equal to what you were deprived of by the other party. But when the defendant has done something particularly bad, you may also ask for punitive damages, money over and above the actual cost of the harm done, intended to teach the defendant a lesson. Punitive damages are fairly rare, but when they're actually granted they may be as much as 4 times the size of the basic damages. Matr/mater comes from the Greek and Latin words for mother. A matron is a mature woman with children. And matrimony is marriage itself, the traditional first step toward motherhood. Maternity. The state of being a mother, motherhood. It's quite possible that the Mona Lisa is a portrait of maternity, and that the painting marks the recent birth of her child Andrea. Maternity is used as both a noun and an adjective. Maternity benefits are benefits specially provided by employers for women having babies, and usually include maternity leave, time off work. With maternity come maternal feelings, which are shown by all species of warm-blooded animals as well as a few reptiles such as crocodiles and alligators. Matriarch. A woman who controls a family, group, or government. Every August all the grown children and their families are summoned to the estate by the matriarch. A matriarchy is a social unit governed by a woman or group of women. It isn't certain that a true matriarchal society has ever existed, so matriarchy is usually treated as an imaginative concept. But there are societies in which relatedness through women rather than men is stressed, and elements of matriarchy may be stronger in certain societies than they are in most of the Western world. And most of us can point to families in which a woman has become the dominant figure, or grande dame, or matriarch. Matrilineal. Based on or tracing the family through the mother. Many of the peoples of Ghana in Africa trace their family through matrilineal connections. A person's lineage is his or her line of ancestors. So matrilineal means basically, through the mother's line, just as patrilineal means, through the father's line. Matrilineality is an important concept in anthropology. Among other things, it usually determines who will inherit property on a person's death. Though families that follow the European model take the father's name and are therefore patrilineal, matrilineal societies have existed around the world, including among various American Indian tribes. Matrix. 1. Something, such as a situation or a set of conditions, in which something else develops or forms. 2. Something shaped like a pattern of lines and spaces. The country's political matrix is so complex that no one who hasn't lived there could possibly understand it. In ancient Rome, a matrix was a female animal kept for breeding, or a plant, sometimes called a parent plant, or mother plant, whose seeds were used for producing other plants. In English the word has taken on many related meanings. Mathematicians use it for a rectangular organization of numbers or symbols that can be used to make various calculations. Geologists use it for the soil or rock in which a fossil is discovered, like a baby in the womb. And matrix was a good choice as the name of the reality in which all humans find themselves living in a famous series of science fiction films. AQU comes from aqua, the Latin word for water. We keep pet fish in an aquarium at home or visit larger sea animals in a building with that name. Water sports such as swimming, canoeing, and sailing are sometimes called aquatics. In Scandinavia there's a popular drink called aquavit, the name coming from the Latin aqua vitae, water of life, though instead of water it mostly consists of alcohol. Aquaculture. The farming of plants and animals, such as kelp, fish, and shellfish, that live in the water. The farming of oysters by the Romans was an early form of aquaculture that has continued to the present day. For most of the modern history of aquaculture, only costly fish and shellfish like salmon and shrimp were harvested. But new technologies are allowing cheaper and more efficient cultivation of fish for food, and such common fish as cod are now being farmed. Seaweeds and other algae are also being grown, for food, mostly in Asia, cattle feed, fertilizer, and experimentally as a source of energy. Aquaculture is now the world's fastest growing form of food production. Aquanaut. A scuba diver who lives and works both inside and outside an underwater shelter for an extended time. Each scientist at the laboratory spent 2 weeks a year as an aquanaut living in the deep sea station. Aquanaut combines aqua with the Greek nauts, meaning sailor. Like astronaut and aeronaut, the word may remind you of those mythical Greek heroes known as the Argonauts, who sailed with Jason on his ship, the Argo, in quest of the Golden Fleece. Various underwater habitats for aquanauts, such as Conch Shelf, Sea Lab, and Marine Lab, have captured the public imagination since the 1960s. Aqueduct. 1. A pipe or channel for water. 2. A bridge-like structure for carrying water over a valley. Roman aqueducts were built throughout the empire, and their spectacular arches can still be seen in Greece, France, Spain, and North Africa. Based partly on the Latin ducere, meaning lead, or conduct, CDUC/duct, the word aqueduct named an ancient civil engineering marvel. You may have seen photos of the great arches of ancient aqueducts spanning valleys in countries throughout the old Roman Empire, practical pipelines that are also regarded as works of timeless beauty. From the 20th century, the 242-mile Colorado River Aqueduct, the 336-mile Central Arizona Project, and the 444-mile California Aqueduct are considered wonders of American engineering, but they are not renowned for their beauty. Most aqueducts today either are river-like channels or run underground, perhaps appearing simply as a long mound. Aquifer. A layer of rock, sand, or gravel that can absorb and hold water. Cities without access to a nearby lake or river must rely on underground aquifers to meet their water needs. The vast but relatively shallow Ogallala Aquifer lies beneath the Great Plains, under portions of 8 states. Its thickness ranges from a few feet to more than 1,000 feet. The Ogallala yields about 30% of the nation's groundwater used for irrigation in agriculture, and provides drinking water for most of the people within the area. But for many years more water has been extracted from the Ogallala than has been returned, and the situation today is of great concern. Words from mythology. Cereal. 1. A plant that produces grain that can be eaten as food, or the grain it produces. 2. The food made from grain. Rice is the main food cereal of Asia, whereas wheat and corn are the main food cereals of the West. The Roman goddess Ceres, the equivalent of the Greek Demeter, was a calm goddess who didn't take part in the quarrels of the other gods. Her particular responsibility was the food-giving plants, and for that reason the food grains came to carry her name. Cereals of the ancient Romans included wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and millet, but not corn, maize, which was a cereal of the Americas. Junoesque. Having mature, poised, and dignified beauty. In 1876, as a centennial gift, the French sent to America a massive statue of a robed Junoesque figure representing liberty, to be erected in New York Harbor. Juno was the wife of Jupiter, the chief of the Roman gods. As the first among goddesses, her power gave her particular dignity, and as goddess of women and marriage, she was a mature matron. But such younger goddesses as Diana, goddess of the hunt, perhaps came closer to today's ideals of slim and athletic female beauty. Martial. Having to do with war and military life. The stirring, martial strains of the British Grenadiers echoed down the snowy street just as dawn was breaking. Mars was the Roman god of war and one of the patron gods of Rome itself. He was responsible for everything military, from warriors to weapons to marching music. Thus, martial arts are skills of combat and self-defense also practiced as sport. When martial law is declared, a country's armed forces take over the functions of the police. And a court-martial is a military court or trial. Promethean. New or creative in a daring way. Beginning in the 1950s, the little Asian countries of South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore began to display a Promethean energy that would become one of the marvels of the modern world. Prometheus was a titan, a generation older than Zeus. When Zeus overthrew his own father Cronus and seized power, Prometheus fought on the side of the gods and against his fellow titans. But when Zeus later wanted to destroy the race of humans, Prometheus saved them by stealing fire for them from the gods. He also taught them how to write, farm, build houses, read the stars and weather, cure themselves when sick, and tame animals, in short, all the arts and skills that make humans unique. So inventive was he that anything of great creativity and originality can still be called Promethean. But Prometheus had taken a terrible risk. Enraged by his disobedience, Zeus had him chained to a rocky cliff, where for many long centuries an eagle daily tore at his liver. Sisyphean. Endless and difficult, involving many disappointments. After 20 years, many researchers had begun to think that defeating the virus was a Sisyphean task that would never succeed. Reputedly the cleverest man on earth, King Sisyphus of Corinth tricked the gods into bringing him back to life after he had died. For this they punished him by sending him back to the underworld, where he must eternally roll a huge rock up a long, steep hill, only to watch it roll back to where he started. Something Sisyphean demands the same kind of unending, thankless, and ultimately unsuccessful efforts. Titanic. Having great size, strength, or power, colossal. The Titanic floods of 1993 destroyed whole towns on the Mississippi River. In Greek mythology, the Titans were the generation of giant creators that produced the younger, stronger, cleverer gods, who soon overpowered and replaced them, see Promethean above. In 1911 the largest ship that had ever been built was christened the Titanic for its unmatched size and strength. But the name may have proved unlucky. On its maiden voyage in 1912 a massive iceberg ripped a fatal hole in the great ship, and it sank in the icy waters off Newfoundland. Triton. 1. A being with a human upper body and the lower body of a fish, a merman. 2. Any of various large mollusks with a heavy, conical shell. In one corner of the painting, a robust Triton emerges from the sea with his conch to announce the coming of the radiant queen. Triton was originally the son of the sea god Poseidon, or Neptune. A guardian of the fish and other creatures of the sea, he is usually shown as hardy, muscular, and cheerful. Like his father, he often carries a trident, three-pronged fork, and may ride in a chariot drawn by seahorses. Blowing on his conch shell, he creates the roar of the ocean. As a decorative image, tritons are simply the male version of mermaids. The handsome seashells that bear their name are the very conchs on which they blow. Triton has also given his name to the planet Neptune's largest moon. Vulcanize. To treat crude or synthetic rubber or plastic so that it becomes elastic and strong and resists decay. The native islanders had even discovered how to vulcanize the rubber from the local trees in a primitive way. The Roman god Vulcan, the Greek Hephaestus, was in charge of fire and the skills that use fire, especially blacksmithing. When Charles Goodyear almost accidentally discovered how to vulcanize rubber in 1839, he revolutionized the rubber industry. He called his process vulcanization because it used fire to heat a mix of rubber and sulfur. Vulcanized rubber was soon being used for shoes and other products, and in the Civil War balloons made of this new, stronger rubber carried Union spies over the Confederate armies. The material's importance increased greatly over the years, and today vulcanized rubber remains in use for automobile tires and numerous other products.